Welcome, everyone. My name is José Batista. I am Community and Events Manager at Cogitatio Press, and welcome to the Ocean and Society Launch webinar series. As you probably know, this is the first of 3 webinars that we are hosting here at Cogitatio Press to celebrate the launch of our newest journal, Ocean and Society. This session, as well as the 2 sessions happening tomorrow and the day after, will be on our first 3 thematic issues to be published through the journal. This first one is tackling the issue titled The Outliers, Stories of Success in Implementing Sustainable Development Goal 14, which is available for your reading pleasure in open access in our Ocean and Society website. Just before we kick this off, I'll give a little overview of the structure of the session. We're going to start with an introduction and a contextualization of the issue by academic editor Sarah Lothian. We're moving on to our first paper presentation of the day, titled Bringing the Ocean to the Stage, Performing Coastal Values and Marine Management by McKinley and Erika Hughes, who we have both with us. So we have a double feature presentation today. Moving on, we'll have a presentation by Marjo Vierros with her article, Building Global Momentum Towards Managing Marine Plastic Pollution Through Sustainable Development Goal 14. And last but not least, our special guest, Marjo Bourrel-McKinnon, who prepared kindly a presentation with some insights on these topics as an officer, from the perspective as an officer of the International Seabed Authority. Regarding the Q&A, there's going to be a Q&A section after the presentations. There's a dedicated Q&A chat box in the session, so you can leave your questions throughout the webinar as they come up. We'll be collecting them throughout the session, and then after the Marjo's presentation, we'll kick off the Q&A, and I can pose the questions to the specific speakers individually as they come. One final note before we kick this off. If you're interested in following the Ocean and Society Journal and stay up to date with articles and the issues that we're going to publish in the future, please follow us on Twitter or X at Cogitatio OAS. This webinar is also being recorded, so if you have a friend or a colleague who couldn't come, or if you want to revisit this conversation in the future, it will be available in full in the Cogitatio Press YouTube page. So without further ado, I'll ask Dr. Sarah Lothian to share her presentation with us. She's an academic editor of this issue and senior lecturer and academic barrister at the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security at the University of Wollongong. So Sarah, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jose, for that very kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, wherever you may be in the world. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this webinar. It's lovely to be with you all, and as one of the academic editors of this thematic issue, I'm very happy to see this important work given a platform through the Ocean and Society Journal. I'd like to take this opportunity of thanking my co-editor and colleague at the Australian National Centre for Ocean Resources and Security, Dr. Bianca Haas, and Fabio Vicente and his wonderful team, including Jose, at Cogitatio Press, for supporting this thematic issue and seeing it through to publication. So as Jose said, I've been asked to introduce the thematic issue, and I thought the best way would be to contextualize it and also provide an understanding of why Bianca and I decided to embark on this topic and highlight the positive work being undertaken to conserve and sustainably use our oceans and marine resources. So for decades, concerns have been expressed that our oceans are heading towards an ecological and societal tipping point and are literally in a state of crisis. So the 1972 UN Conference on the Human Environment really marked the beginning of what we saw as a global effort to preserve our natural environment. And so in deciding to convene that conference, the UN General Assembly emphasised that new approaches would be required to address the mounting number of issues facing the global environment, with our oceans identified as a key priority area. Now, at the time, these new approaches came in the form of a declaration of principles, which for the first time provided us with a common set of concepts to help inspire and guide the protection of the environment, including our oceans and seas. Now, influenced by a rising tide of environmentalism, we then had the 1992 Earth Summit, which adopted a further declaration of principles, but this time we also had Agenda 21, which was a non-binding plan of action. Now, Chapter 17 of Agenda 21 really underlined that the world's oceans, seas, and adjacent coastal areas form an integrated whole and were a positive asset that presented a number of opportunities for sustainable development. And again, Agenda 21 emphasised that new approaches were urgently required for marine and coastal area management at the national, regional, and global levels. And it brought the concept of sustainable development into common parlance, if not making it a household phrase. Now, although Agenda 21 acquired considerable coverage among states, its implementation was very uneven, and it was clear that further action would be required to accelerate the sustainable development agenda and shift the world onto a more sustainable path. So in an effort to change course, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted by UN member states in 2015. And at the heart of the 2030 Agenda are 17 Sustainable Development Goals, with SDG 14, Life Below Water, completely devoted to the conservation and sustainable use of our oceans, seas, and marine resources. Now, SDG 14 is considered to be one of the most difficult goals to achieve. And for the most part, academic discourse on SDG 14 tends to really focus on the negatives, more specifically the lack of progress, limitations, and barriers in achieving its 7 targets and 3 sub-targets. Now, the ocean continues to be in a state of emergency as increasing acidification, ocean warming, and plastic pollution worsen its health. Additionally, the alarming trend of overfishing persists, leading to the depletion of over 1/3 of our global fish stocks. Now, although there's been some progress in expanding marine protected areas, combating illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, banning fishing subsidies, and supporting small-scale fishers, action is not advancing at the speed or scale required to meet SDG 14. Now, while the study of the challenges in reaching key targets is critical in understanding the myriad of issues facing the world's oceans and seas, together as academics, Bianca and I recognise an important opportunity to explore a key question in this thematic issue, namely, are we failing to give due recognition to the important work and new and innovative approaches being undertaken at a local, regional, and global level to implement SDG 14 and improve the health of our coastal and marine environments? So the
Sarah,
overriding
sorry,
aim...
you're halfway
Yes.
through your time, just letting you know.
Okay, no worries. So the overriding aim of this thematic issue is to highlight unsung heroes and stories of success in implementing SDG 14 from so-called outliers. So in 2016, Joshua Sinner and a team of academics wrote an article entitled Bright Spots Among the World's Coral Reefs. And this article suggested that the theory and practice of identifying and learning from outliers could assist us in combating the ongoing decline in the world's coral reefs. Outliers being places where marine ecosystems are found to be performing substantially better than expected given the environmental conditions and socioeconomic drivers they're exposed to. Furthermore, this article highlighted that so-called bright spots and positive outliers could result in increased translation of scientific knowledge into policy. So expanding upon this idea of outliers, this thematic issue presents a number of success stories in implementing SDG 14 targets, including contributions that detail new approaches and innovative ways of engaging with legal, scientific, and sociological perspectives, as well as initiatives, programs, projects, and plans being undertaken in an effective way to conserve and sustainably use our oceans, seas, and marine resources. So in summing up, in effect, we've come full circle with this thematic issue responding in many respects to that initial call made in 1972 at the UN Conference on the Human Environment, where they sought new approaches to counter the mounting number of threats and challenges facing our marine environment. So with that, Jose, I think I've probably reached my time. So I think it'd be a good time to stop there and I'll hand over to our wonderful authors.
Thank you, Sarah, so much for this introduction. So let's get into the articles in the issue. We have our first paper presentation by Emma McKinley, a research fellow at Cardiff University and founder of the Marine Social Science Network, joined by Erika Hughes, professor of theatre for social change at the University of Portsmouth. This article is titled "Bringing the Ocean to the Stage: Performing Coastal Values in Marine Management." And besides Emma and Erika, this article was co-authored by Stephanie Georgia, Priscilla Boyer, Catherine Federa, Alison Fairbrass, and Jonathan Potts. So whenever you want, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm starting my timer. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues, so Erika is very kindly sharing my screen so as not to steal bandwidth from me. But thank you so much, everybody, for this wonderful opportunity and to be part of the first session launching this great new journal, Ocean Society. This talk is really drawing on some of what we were thinking around when we looked at the call for the special issue around outliers. We really wanted to draw on the ideas of marine social sciences, but also arts and theatre as being outliers within that broader field of ocean science and ocean research as we think about how we achieve the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, but also more recently, the UN Ocean Decade. So we'll be drawing on the project work that we've been doing through the Diverse Marine Values Project. Erika, next slide, please. Which has the very lofty and ambitious goal of trying to generate and influence the transdisciplinary capability of the UK marine policy community to integrate diverse values into decision-making to support sustainable management of our marine resources. So essentially what we were trying to do was to move away from a very economic and ecological lens of valuing marine and coastal systems in the UK and thinking about different ways that we could do that. Next slide, Erika, please. And to do that, we looked at three test sites, so three communities across the UK, which included Shetland in the north of Scotland, Portsmouth in the south of England, and then Chepstow, which is a border town between England and Wales. I'm going to focus particularly on the communities of Shetland and Portsmouth in this talk, because that's where we did the theatre work that we'll be talking to you. But really, I guess just it's worth highlighting that we really tested and explored the use of a really diverse set of methodologies, particularly drawing on arts and creative methods to understand diverse values in these three communities and think about how they contributed to ocean literacy and understanding human-ocean connections in these places. Next slide, please, Erika. And really, one of the things that has really drawn and pushed this work is thinking about the Ocean Decade, but of course also SDG 14. One of the things we were really trying to understand were these human-ocean relationships and the values that underpin those. And that is worth kind of bringing us to the Ocean Decade, which I'm sure many of you will be aware launched in 2021 with the 10th goal of restoring humanity's relationship with the ocean. And we wanted to think about how understanding different values and different relationships would help us get towards that goal. Next slide, please, Erika. Part of that has been around the framing of ocean literacy, which has been positioned as a mechanism of change within the Ocean Decade and really about a way of delivering a societal outcome. So we wanted to use the framing of ocean literacy, which at its very simplest is an understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean, to help us understand these diverse relationships and diverse values that we might have. And I don't have time to go into all the stuff around ocean literacy, but I just wanted to highlight that that's the framing that we were using for this theatre work and helping us understand how theatre could be a catalyst as a way of both fostering ocean literacy, but also understanding where people might be in terms of their ocean literacy. Next slide, please, Erika. We used a evolved model of ocean literacy that had been developed through some work that I had been doing with Daryl Burden and our Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs here in the UK, and then finished through the Diverse Marine Values Project, which proposed a 10-dimension model of ocean literacy, which really provided the kind of underpinning foundation of our analysis as we went on through this work. It's just worth highlighting that within this model, we used 6 dimensions that were already in existence prior to our work on it. So knowledge, behaviour, communication, attitudes, activism, and awareness as you go around the circle. But we also proposed 4 new dimensions, including emotions, so the emotional connection that people might have with marine and coastal spaces, the type of access and experience people might have, and the diverse ways that that can be facilitated, The resilience and adaptive capacity that people might have, or institutions or decision-making processes there might be, and then trust and transparency. And I'm now going to hand over to Erika to talk us through some of the theatre practice that we undertook.
Yeah, so first of all, I should say that, when we think about theater, oftentimes there's some sort of very specific sort of West End musical, big kind of polished work that we might think about. But it's a little bit of a misnomer, because what we're actually doing in this kind of work is very process-based as opposed to product-based. And so what that means is, in this case, we had a team of scientists, policy experts, including Emma and our other co-authors, joining together with individuals in both Portsmouth and in Shetland to make a work of theater. And through that making process actually was the research tool. So this gives you a lot of qualitative data, because not only are you having kind of really in-depth conversations, but you're offering questions to your participants that they can answer in different ways. So they're answering sometimes with their bodies. They're answering sometimes by making a picture together, or maybe they're bringing in materials. So this really takes it really off of the page and into a really kind of holistic experience together with your researchers. What it can also do, and what we explored, was when you can when you can use theater to turn the research process from one being driven by researchers onto participants, and have the participants also be generating some of the research questions as well. So one of the things that we did in this process was play a game inspired by a lot of the work of Augusto Boal, whose work Theater of the Oppressed is really kind of it's the kind of gold standard for this sort of community engagement work. And this activity was called Come Be My Neighbor. And so if all the participants, if we were physically together in the room, what we would invite you to do is, I would, as the facilitator, stand up and say, come be my neighbor if you like cats. I really like cats. And so anybody who, likes cats would come over and stand next to me. And then we would get a sense of, okay, we've got a physical space in the room of this affinity group, right? Then what I would do is turn it over to, say, Emma, and I would say, Emma, can you offer us a provocation?
I can. Mine, I'm bringing it back to the ocean. Come be my neighbor if you like being in the sea, as an example.
And so, we would start the questions, but then what's really interesting is when you turn it over to participants, what are they interested in learning about one another? And what are they interested in learning about you as the researchers? So that's a sample activity, but those kinds of activities are then building blocks to whatever it is that you end up making. So in Portsmouth, we created a forum theater piece, and in Shetland, we created a devised theater piece. But both of these really explored these issues of the community's relationship to the coast itself. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Erika. And so as part of this process, we asked all of our participants to fill in, well, not to fill in, but to give us their reflections. It was really open. They were given postcards at the end of every session, which resulted in the final number of 103 postcards. These postcards were blank, and we just asked them to reflect. So in Shetland, we were with the young people. We worked with Shetland Youth Theatre, and we were with them for a week. So they reflected every day. In Portsmouth, we were doing the work with the master's students on the Marine Science Master's programme. And so they reflected after each session. And then to help us get to this understanding of how theatre practice could be used as a tool to understand and foster ocean literacy, we then undertook usual kind of thematic coding, using initially the ocean literacy dimensions that I gave you a quick snapshot of at the beginning as that initial kind of preset set of codes that we were looking at, but also looked at emergent themes that came out through the feedback process as well. And what we found that the theatre practice could act in that dual way that I've already kind of highlighted. So a way of understanding those diverse values through the stories we were capturing, particularly with the young people we worked with in Shetland, through their interests and the values they had as young people living in an island community of Shetland. But also particularly for our master's students as a tool of developing transdisciplinary skills and broadening out the idea of what ocean literacy knowledge might be. That knowledge for ocean researchers and ocean practitioners may also include knowledge of stakeholder engagement skills or knowledge of how to facilitate a consultation experience. So kind of broadening that toolkit of what knowledge might be. Erika, next slide, please. And then I'm going to skip a couple because I know we're running out of time. So just to kind of highlight that we looked at knowledge as one of the, something fine is happening. Knowledge is one of the key dimensions that were identified through the feedback sessions that we, postcards that we had. That was probably a bit unsurprising, really, because knowledge is the most commonly identified theme. We found that there was knowledge around learning practice, and developing knowledge through creative practice was something that all of our participants really enjoyed. We also saw that the importance of storytelling as a way of developing knowledge and understanding knowledge was really highlighted, that they really enjoyed writing their own stories as well as hearing from other people about their stories. And as I've already mentioned, that opportunity to have experiential learning to develop skills. And Erika, if I could ask you to skip down to that last slide, number 12, please, that'd be great. No, next one. Thank you very much. And so the kind of key observations really were that the theatre practice allowed us to really explore that expanded conceptualization of ocean literacy, particularly allowing us to understand dimensions of knowledge, emotions, and access came out very clearly in our analysis. We really also found that transdisciplinary thinking and working to co-develop process rather than product through bringing in arts into our ways of understanding diverse knowledges was a really valuable tool for our project. Of course, those kind of methods take a lot of time, but they were really valuable. And we still have some work to do, I think, to really think about how we can integrate that into decision-making to actually achieve things like the goals of SDG 14. Erika, final slide, please, on our whistle-stop tour of theatre and ocean literacy. So a very quick thank you to all of our participants, our facilitators, our actors. We wouldn't have been able to do this work without them. And I will hand over to the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Erika and Ebba, for your presentation. I'll call to the virtual stage Marjo Vierros, who's presenting her paper, Building Global Momentum Towards Managing Marine Plastic Pollution Through Sustainable Development Goal 14. Besides from Marjo, this paper is co-authored by Gemma Nelson, Mariana Caldeira, Andre Polajak, Julia Veiga, and Alumita Sekinaray. I also forgot to mention, Marjo Vierros is Head of Science Policy Research at the Ocean Voices program. Welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Jose. And it's hard to be as fascinating as the previous presentation was, but I'll try. And I just wanted to really acknowledge my international team of co-authors here, because we all come from different backgrounds and different countries. Myself, more from the SDG 14 side, but Gemma and Andre, for example, much more from the plastic pollution negotiations side. And we also have a number of co-authors who very much know that local to global space for various policy processes. So let's see. Yeah, so this paper really explored how SDG 14, and particularly through the 2017 UN Ocean Conference that aimed to enhance the implementation of SDG 14, built this really important global momentum towards addressing plastic pollution. And this is particularly demonstrated in the voluntary commitments, which bring those local experiences into the global scale. And progress has happened in this space. And by the time of the second UN Ocean Conference, in 2021, actually, the international legally binding treaty to end plastic pollution was under negotiation already. So this is a bright spot in implementing SDG 14. But I want to take you back to 2015 when Agenda 2030 was adopted. And this was a time when plastic pollution in the ocean and the crisis of plastic pollution was really permeating into the public consciousness. And there were studies that were highlighting, for example, that 12.7 million tons of plastic pollution was entering the ocean annually. And that by 2030, this might reach 300 million tons. And this study on the right-hand side over here, that from the Ellen MacArthur and the World Economic Forum, demonstrated that there might be more plastic than fish in the ocean very soon. And this was something that really captured the imagination of policymakers as well. And it became a part of many interventions and speeches at the UN, including by the Secretary General. And what we then found was that no part of the ocean was left untouched. Even the deep sea had plastic pollution. And this then had consequences across all the SDGs for biodiversity, human health, economies, and so on. So SDG 14 has 10 targets, but the first one of those relates to marine pollution. And this is not new. We've seen this target in a number of policy processes before that. But within this early implementation of SDG 14, this target became all about plastic pollution. And that was particularly evident in the June 2017 Ocean Conference. And what was remarkable about this Ocean Conference was how inclusive it was. It brought together all the stakeholders from grassroots levels to governments to industry as well. And they were urged to register voluntary commitments. That was one of the ways they could participate. And this was really a hit because about 1,400 of them was registered by the end of that year. But a number of those, large number in fact, related to plastic pollution. And we delved a little bit deeper into those commitments and what they held. And most of them, the entities that registered them were governments, NGOs, but if you add civil society into that NGO category, you can really see that a lot of them were grassroots actions. But private sector partnerships, UN, everybody participated in this. And the activities were things like raising public awareness, education, communication, waste management, which related to less packaging, less single-use plastics entering the marine environment, better recycling. But there was also research, there was beach cleanups, there was underwater cleanups, and various forms of stakeholder involvement. And these, when you start looking at their impacts, they actually add up to considerable impacts, and they add up to considerable momentum as well, because everybody feels that they can do something to solve that crisis, and they can bring that something into a global forum like the Ocean Conference. So we looked a little bit deeper into some of these local solutions as well with our diverse team of authors. And in fact, majority of those voluntary commitments, with some exceptions, were local or national. And these are very much context specific because that context is very different everywhere. And they were presenting some creative solutions that were tailored to those local conditions. And these really were bright spots that were achieving quite a lot on a local level. They included diverse actors and actions, youth, volunteers. There was an effort to involve marginalized groups as well. And they offered lessons for the global context that can be useful in how you implement, for example, an international treaty on plastic pollution. But they also demonstrated the importance of equity in these kinds of discussions, because many of the low-income countries are really facing considerable cost from the marine litter and plastic that ended up on their beaches from transboundary situations, and which they then had to clean up, often with very inadequate recycling facilities. So some studies have found that plastic pollution really reduces national GDP in many downstream countries. So it is an equity issue as well. And while these local solutions in voluntary commitments and otherwise were wonderful and really bright spots, they're not enough alone to solve what is a global crisis. And they're too fragmented to do that. And mostly they related to these midstream to downstream measures on waste management and awareness raising and the cleanups. But what we really needed at that point was a global scale solution by multiple stakeholders that included the global circular economy, addressing the full life cycle of plastics. But at that stage, or even now, there is no previous international treaty to address plastic pollution on a global scale. There are some regional efforts towards this end. And while SDG 14 and the 2017 UN Ocean Conference provided the venue for discussing this problem, it is a soft law process. It is not legally binding. So moving then on to the UN Environment Assembly and our UNEA. And in December 2017, just a couple of months after the 2017 UN Ocean Conference, started this ad hoc open-ended expert group to work on marine litter and microplastics. And eventually post-COVID in 2022, adopted resolution to develop this international treaty to end plastic pollution, which would include both binding and voluntary approaches, and importantly, would address the full life cycle of plastics. It was a very ambitious arrangement to complete this treaty through 5 meetings by 2024. We're almost at the end of 2024 now. But this was something that the second UN Ocean Conference in 2022, here I have the year right, welcomed as one of the bright spots in implementation of SDG 14, which was otherwise quite behind in its implementation. So just to show you
2 minutes, sorry,
okay.
2 minutes to go with the time.
Okay, so just very quickly, we're now at the 5th negotiating meeting. It is going quite slowly, and the outcomes are still uncertain. There are sticky issues about what the scope of the agreement will be. Will it cover the whole full life cycle of the plastics? Will it be binding or legally binding or voluntary or some combination? And also the nature of the debate going from a more informal process to a legally binding negotiation is changing and has changed in terms of the new groupings and new lobbies coming in as well. So the key takeaways, this is my last slide, Jose, is that soft law processes such as the SDG 14 and Ocean Conference can really become a forum for new ideas and build momentum towards developing a legally binding treaty or discussing new issues as well. And they can really work in bringing those local experiences onto the global stage as well, as happened with the voluntary commitments. And this was due to the inclusivity that the UN Ocean Conferences managed to create this atmosphere where everybody could participate, whoever they were. But also the holistic nature of SDG 14 and its targets, they cover pretty much everything ocean-related, allowed for those discussions to overcome the fragmentation that we often see in ocean governance. And when you take SDG 14 in this broader framework of SDGs that consider things like human health, equity, sustainable reduction and consumption, sustainable economies, it really places the plastic pollution problem in that framework where it should be, because it really cannot be addressed in just the environmental sphere. And my final point is that there really is an equity issue with conservation as well, and this has become an issue in other international negotiations too. But it really has been highlighted here, and particularly by those downstream countries that end up with a lot of the transboundary marine pollution from other countries. And I'll just end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marjo, for your presentation. I'll now welcome Ms. Marie Bourrel-McKinnon, Senior Policy Officer and Special Assistant to the Secretary General at the International Seabed Authority, who will give us some insights on this topic through the perspective of the ISA. So, Marie, whenever you're ready, the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you, José, and it's a pleasure being with you. It's still in the morning in Jamaica. It's really quite a lot of pressure to end the round of discussion, and talking after Marjo is always, you know, a little bit impressive. But I'm very happy to be part of that discussion, and I think the overall question set by Sarah is something that is by itself quite remarkable, because we tend to take quite systematically a negative outlook on what the ocean is bringing in the realm of policy discussion or governance. And I agree that most of the time this discussion is kind of shortcutting a little bit all the work that is being done, and in fact all the achievements and all the process and the positive elements that are done. So I'm going to try, through the perspective of the work that we do at the International Seabed Authority, to highlight some of the initiatives that we have put in place. And I'm more than happy to expand further if needed during the Q&A session. So I'm sure everybody knows what the international seabed is, but I'm not sure if everybody is aware that 40 years ago there was an institution, an international body established to manage all the seabed activities that are undertaken beyond national jurisdiction in what we call the area with a capital A. And what you see on that map is that the area with a capital A basically represents 54% of the world ocean. So this is the remits of the jurisdiction of the International Seabed Authority, which is the organization I've been working for now 8 years. And it's quite a task. So I'm going to be very quick on that, but just to give it a little bit of context. We are born through the UN United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, ANCORS, and actually, while ANCORS was adopted in 1982, it didn't enter into force because the entire regime about the deep seabed and activities in the deep seabed were still raising a lot of issues between industrialized countries and the newly independent countries from what we have today as a G77 group, which is basically all the developing countries. And 12 years more of negotiation was needed for the ANCORS to be to enter into force. One, the implementing agreement for the deep seabed area has been adopted. So when the 1994 agreement was adopted and entered into force in 1994, ISA was born and UNCLOS was also able to be implemented. So basically the mandate of ISA is quite unique if you look at ocean governance today, because it was already conceived and designed as an extremely comprehensive and integrated mandate. So ISA has the exclusive mandate to manage exploration and exploitation activity in the area with a capital A, but also ISA has the mandate to protect the environment and biodiversity. ISA is also assigned with the duty to promote and encourage marine scientific research. And of course, the key pillar of what makes ISA quite unique is that there is a very strong mandate in ensuring the equitable sharing of benefits. And Marjo just mentioned the fact that equity is becoming more and more relevant in international negotiation. It is true, and it's very important. And what is quite remarkable is that that was already part of the DNA of ISA 40 years ago, in fact. If you look at this mandate in a comprehensive manner, then also you can appreciate how well designed it was, because everything plugs to each other. If you really want to manage exploration or exploitation activities, then you need to be able to inform your decision and the regulation you are adopting based on base available science. So that feeds into the pillar of marine scientific research and dissemination of information. But when you also want to manage activities, it is never like you can hear sometimes a dual mandate. You have to manage the activities, economic activities or commercial activities, while at the same time ensuring protection of the environment and biodiversity. In fact, the core of the mandate of ISA is to ensure that whatever activities to take place, it cannot be done without proper safeguards and mechanism in place to ensure that the environment can be protected. And if you cannot do that, then the activities cannot proceed. That also explains why for the last 10 years, negotiations are still ongoing about what we call the mining code, which is basically the last part of the regulation that have been adopted. We already have exploration regulation, and now we are progressing with the exploitation regulation, deep seabed mining, basically. So a very specific trait of the work that we do is that we are designed to be the trustee of the 54% of the world's ocean seabed, because our main mandate, all of this, is directed to what we call the common heritage of humankind. So basically, we have to ensure that whatever is done benefits to humanity as a whole. So it's quite a challenge as well. So when we look at that in the context of the discussion we're having together today, the question is how ISA has been able to fulfill its mandate with, with this driving force as ensuring he can stand as stewards for the area, aligning its action along the lines of the 2030 agenda. And in 2021, actually, the Secretary General decided to get a little bit of an insight about that to commission an independent review that was done by a consultant, but under the strategic guidance of a group of international experts, specialists in all the different issues of sustainable management, but ocean governance. And the findings went through a multi-stakeholder consultation, and it came out of that exercise that through the spectrum of competence and responsibilities assigned to ISA by ANCORS, actually, and the work that ISA has been doing for the last 40 years or so, then actually ISA was already seen as contributing concretely to 12 of the 17 SDGs. And the mapping that was done was extremely useful for member states, partners, and different actors in that sphere, because it gave us kind of a benchmark where we could already celebrate what was working well and what needed a little bit more of attention, I will say. So what was also super interesting in that exercise is that we were able to circle back the findings of that mapping and analysis through the strategic direction of the strategic plan of ISA, trying to inform how the organization should continue to look ahead and fulfill basically the societal needs that were identified through that global agenda. What I think is quite remarkable in the work that has been done recently is that to continue to really have a focused approach, ISA was able to adopt an action plan for marine scientific research in support of the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. And as far as I know, I think it's still the only UN agency that has been able to do that, taking from the mandate assigned under UNCLOS, looking at the priorities that have been established by member states and trying to come up with something that's going to be contributing meaningfully to the scientific objective of the decade by saying, okay, we have, this is the remits of our work, and this is where we have to focus if we want to really bring added value to that international process. That was quite a super interesting exercise. The plan has been in place since December 2020, endorsed by 168 member states. And a lot of progress have been made. What was also quite interesting is that a few years later, 2 years after that, we were able to adopt a focused capacity development strategy, saying, okay, we already know that we are undertaking that work to advance marine scientific research in the deep sea, to generate and disseminate information, etc. But how do we ensure that there is an inclusive approach along the line of who can actively engage in the science that is generated, and having this, experts participating in it, but also end users. So we managed to kind of consolidate that loop with the capacity development strategy of ISA, which has brought a lot of impetus, because actually the work that we do is based on capacity priority needs assessments through member states. So in fact, the priority needs assessment that are identified for us to focus our attention on capacity development depends on the needs that are identified by our member state themselves. So we are just like demand driven. And I think that has been quite remarkable in the way that we have organized our work. For the purpose of our discussion today, I just wanted to take two small examples of what also we have been able to progress over the years. It's called REMP. It's a Regional Environmental Management Plan. So basically, it's one of the key initiatives through which ISA is fulfilling this mandate of managing and protecting the environment, because we do have at the moment 31 contracts for exploration. So it's not mining, it's just doing environmental baselines and resource assessments. So it's very very low impact for the environment. Basically, it's really about marine scientific research and exploration activities where you have equipment put on the seabed or in the water column to collect information. And one of the most intense area that is being studied at the moment, it's what we call the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. It's in the South Pacific Ocean, and it's really big. It's about 5,000 kilometer long. And more than 10 years ago, ISA was probably one of the first organizations to tackle the challenge of dealing with marine spatial planning beyond national jurisdiction at that scale. Because when you talk about marine spatial planning in general, you're talking about shallow waters. Here, the average depth of that area is 6,000 meter depth in the ocean. So it's really a 4D multi-dimension that we have to manage all the time. And the ramps that has been put in place enables to identify the area where you do have contracts, where information is being collected, but also potentially which part of this area has to be closed forever to mining. So it is what we call the APEI. So you can see them in green in the graph here. All these APEIs are basically no mining zone forever. So they are already closed, pending further work all around. What you see in gray and yellow are the contract areas. And at the moment, this network of APIs on that only spot is around 1.97 million kilometers square. So when you look at it from a positive outlook, it's probably the largest MPA on the seabed at the moment, and maybe in the ocean, because it's quite unique in the way that it's managed. But what is interesting is you need to understand that every year, for each of these contracts that are taking place here, contractors have to report against more than 100 environmental parameters. So we do have already a legacy data for 40 years, which give us really the impetus to inform the decision-making process that are continuing to manage the activities there. The other side of my slide basically
Excuse me, Marie, your time is almost up. So if you want to pick up the pace a little bit.
I need 3 more minutes. Yeah, I need 3 more minutes. Thank you, José. So
okay.
The other side of my slide is just to demonstrate basically how we leverage the work that is being done by all these different actors and partners, including through what we call Area 2030, which is our contribution to the, I don't know if you heard about Seabed 2030 and GEPCO, is the mapping of the ocean seabed. So in our case, the contractors that are doing exploration, they at the moment are able to map a bathymetry of the seabed at 6,000 meter depth up to 15 centimeter or 5 centimeter. So the quality of the bathymetric data is quite unique, and we are giving that for free to Seabed and Nippon 2030. But we also have the SKI, Sustainable Seabed Knowledge Initiative, which is the basically taxonomy, deep sea taxonomy initiative that enable us to build capacity development and inform as well the knowledge about the deep sea and the different ecosystem and connectivity that is taking place there. I want to finish my presentation by looping out on something that has been quite important for us for a while now, which is our commitment to advancing women empowerment and leadership in marine scientific research. And that has led us to adopting since 2017 a voluntary commitment and highly dedicated to that. So for the last UN Ocean Conference in 2022, we were able to do the first ever gender mapping in women scientists in deep sea research for least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and SIDS. And based on that, we have gathered a lot of partners that you have here to enable us to implement few initiatives, including the SHE mentorship program for SEER Exceed, which is already implemented and works very well. And through that, we've been able to leverage a lot of partnership to build the momentum around advancing concrete opportunities where women scientists can penetrate or continue to penetrate a world that is quite male-dominated and can contribute to meaningful outcome of the work that we do through marine scientific research, engineering, or capacity development. So with that, I just gonna conclude by saying that we've been talking a little bit about ocean literacy. In our case, we refer to deep sea literacy. It's the same concept, but it's basically bringing the abyss to the surface to ensure that as much as people understand the work that we do and what we don't do, and invite everybody to be part of that discussion and continue to work with us as we proceed with our mandate. So very short presentation, but if you want to know more about what we do, I invite you to consult the latest Secretary General annual report that is very comprehensive, and you will have the details about everything. So I'm going to stop here, José. Sorry, I've exceeded a little bit the time allocated, but very difficult to be short and concise with all the things. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, and you did a very good job at that. So we're going to move on to our Q&A section of this session. We have 2 questions already posed here on our Q&A box, one other one in the chat. I see an attendee, Will Burton. You have raised your hand. If you wish to pose a question, please do so in text form so I can pose it to whomever you want to make a question towards. So the first 2 questions are for the first presenters, for Emma and Erika. I'll ask them all at once because it's a really short question and a really long question. Anu Princeman asks, theatre approach, very appealing, but how do we engage these people who do not show up? And afterwards, Jenny House says, thanks, Emma and Erika, for your fascinating presentation. I'm curious about the diversity of the actors and participants and their views. You mentioned the Being My Neighbor exercise, and I wondered what the process/experience was like in terms of intercultural communication or building consensus/relationships between groups who might not usually interact much or who might have conflicting views on ocean values. Was this something that stood out to you as part of the process? If so, how did you navigate this? So go ahead.
I'll come in first and then I might hand over to Erika for a little bit of the second question. So in terms of the first question around how we engage people who didn't show up, so as I said at the beginning of the presentation, we use different methods in all 3 of our communities. And so the point wasn't to get everybody engaged in one method. It was to use different methods to reach different audiences and to recognize that it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of approach. And for the theatre, in both of the communities that we did the work in, we had kind of gateway facilitators that we were able to access. So we were really lucky to work with Shetland Arts and Shetland Youth Theatre in Shetland. And so that was like a pre-formed, amazing group of young actors who were willing to be part of the process that we kind of co-developed with them. It wasn't something that we designed. It was very much designed with them, although Erika and Stephanie took the lead on that. And then the second question, which I think is still up there, I'm going to just read it again, and I'll hand over to Erika for any reflections as well, around the diversity of the actors and participants and whether we looked at the process in terms of intercultural communication or building consensus. So one of the really fascinating things for me as someone who is a theatre person in my personal life but not in my professional life, was that the co-design process really meant that we, as I said, we weren't leading it. So the young people, particularly again with the Shetland piece of work, we really kind of allowed them to challenge the power dynamics, and it was very much we are all part of the same team, and if you don't agree with the way this is going, you have the power to change that, and you have the power to kind of take it in a direction that works with what you're interested in, and to bring us into your ideas of what consensus might be about the thing that we were trying to talk about, which was a really brilliant, like in terms of the output itself. Like we took that right to the point where we challenged the idea of who was the audience and who were the participants, and got our audience members to come on stage and took them backstage around the whole theatre and really challenged that whole idea of spectatorship. So it was a really fascinating. For the paper though, we didn't really look at the diversity of the respondents and how that matched up with their feedback and their views. That wasn't part of the analysis that we were doing. So definitely something we could do in more detail. Erika, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say really quickly that the work in Portsmouth was with individuals who were all studying on a master's in marine management course. But this was a really broad international group of students. And so and the format that we used, forum theater, was actually really designed to explore what these differences are. So we had a number of people and it was also really designed to explore what the assumptions that somebody going into marine management might have. And really designed to get them to challenge the assumptions, oh, are wind farms necessarily good or bad, and kind of divorcing ourselves from those kinds of binary assumptions that then, bring lots of other things along with them, and really exploring more what it is to listen and to hold space for nuance.
Well, I guess that was enough to answer Jenny's question. I'll put it as answered. And we have a last question here. I'll remind everyone, this is your last chance. If you want to ask something to our lovely presenters, this is your final chance. I guess I'll ask the last question, which is again to the first presenters, Emma and Erika. We have Helen Kilelo. She asks, based on your findings, do emotions influence the respondents' perceptions of the oceans positively or negatively? And what are the policy initiatives in place?
I love seeing people use that word. It's my favorite thing. It's the best pun I think I could ever have come up with. I love it. So with this work, some of the emotions were really around positive learning spaces, enjoying learning about the ocean rather than it being a negative, it's all a disaster kind of perspective. And so we really tried to put that kind of positive spin on it. We didn't look at whether emotional response was correlated with or influencing perceptions generally. We do have some work where we used ocean, where we developed the UK's National Ocean Literacy Survey for our 3 communities and looked at kind of place-based ideas of ocean literacy. And there is definitely an opportunity to look at whether emotional response in those questions relates to other views and perceptions about the ocean more generally, like such as things like level of concern, awareness of kind of ecosystem services and benefits people might get from the ocean, but that work is still ongoing. I think we're writing another paper. We will be finishing another paper drawing on the theatre work and thinking about whether where emotion might fit into that. I think is something that Erika and I could definitely explore actually. Like I said, it wasn't part of we didn't do that correlation analysis.
We'll move on. I don't know if Erika wants to add something to this answer. All right.
No, I think that's great.
All right, so we have another question here by Will Burton. Hello, thanks for this talk. Very interesting. Has a question for Marie, which is, how does the USA and the ISA interact, given that the USA is not a party of the UNCLOS agreement?
Yeah, Will, very good question. Actually, the US is an observer, so they have been attended all the session of ISA, and the rules in ISA is that you don't need to be a member to be allowed to speak. So if you're an observer, you're also granted the right to speak. And the US has always been extremely constructive in contributing to the work that we've been doing. Like, for example, in the context of the international negotiation for the mining code at the moment, the US has a very big delegation, and they are comprised of a lot of technical experts from USGS or NOAA or others. So having them in that discussion, bringing along a lot of technical input, is making the work that we do even more relevant. So we work very well with the US, and I think it's also reflect upon the fact that for the US, although they have not ratified UNCLOS, they have always repeatedly said that the content of UNCLOS is generally seen as customary law, so they follow the content of the convention, even if they are not party to it, but we work very well with them.
Okay, thank you, Marie. I think these are all questions by our audience. I'd like to ask if any of our speakers has any final remarks or any final comments that they wish to address. If not, I want to thank everyone who attended this webinar. I want to thank every speaker, Sarah, Marjo, Erika, Emma, and Marie, for showing up and having this lovely talk celebrating our newest journal. Before we leave, I want to remind you this issue that we talked about is already available on the Cogitatio Press website. If you want to follow the next articles of the next issues that we're going to publish, I suggest following Cogitatio OAS, that's Ocean and Society, on x.com. The recording of this webinar will be available soon on our YouTube channel. There was a question, a very relevant question in the chat asking about the materials that the speakers presented today, if they will be available. I will ask each speaker if they wish to share their materials, and if so, they will be sent to every attendee of this webinar. Thank you so much for participating once again. This is the first of 3 webinars in our Ocean Society launch series. Tomorrow we'll have another session on maritime justice, and the day after we'll host another session on gender equality in blue growth and in the maritime sector. So I hope to see you all there again, and thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.